As I was saying, I ended up working with the film industry way back in 1968. I got a job at Universal Studios in Hollywood as a tour guide. I'd just come out of the army. I'd done my 2 years army service in the States because my family had immigrated to America way back in 1960. And I get drafted into the army in 1965. I'd done my 2 years army service. I'd done my one tour in Vietnam. Come back, ended up in California through one of the other guys who I met in the army who unfortunately got his legs blown off in a mortar thing. But anyway, his uncle worked at Universal Studios in Hollywood, and when I arrived, everybody called me Scotty, and he says, "Scotty, you want to come and do a day tour around the studio?" And I said, "Yeah, I'd love to." You know, but I mean, I used to watch John Wayne and everybody and sit there with a mouth open, and then he took me on the tour of the studio, and I just fell in love with it. I was fascinated, fell in love with it. Anyway, to cut a long story short, I wanted a job. I asked his uncle Pat, how would I get a job in the studio system. He says, "Well, you have to get an agent. You must be involved with an agency." And the biggest agency in Hollywood was called Central Casting, who supplied extras and walk-ons and things like this. So I went to Central Casting, and they told me, "We need you to get a portfolio of what you've done." And I says, "I haven't done anything." They said, "But we still need Head and Shoulders, things like this, you know, for a thing." And I says, "Okay." So they gave me a list of all the agencies in Hollywood, and I went round all the agencies in Hollywood. Big plush office suites, guys sitting with big huge cigars, and there was only 2 left in the list. And the second last was a place called Richard Productions. It was an agency who hired studio personnel, but I didn't know that. And it was like all the places I'd been to were big plush office suites, but this place was like a dirty old office, a doctor's office. You know, there was magazines strewn all over the place. So I went in, knocked on the door, there wasn't any answer, and I was just about to walk back out again. And a voice from the inner office called, "Yeah, can I help you?" You know, and I went in, and he started talking, and he says, "Gee, you've got a beautiful accent, where are you from?" I says, "Scotland." He says, "Scotland, England?" I said, "We've to explaining it." I says, "Yes, Scotland, England." He says, "How can we help you?" And I told him what had happened and how I'd just come out of the service and everything. And he says, "We don't hire extras or that." He says, "We hire studio personnel." He says, "Would you be able to read a script?" And I said, "Like what?" He says, "Well, if I gave you a script to read, could you read it?" I says, "Yeah." I says, "I can read and write as good as anybody." So he gave me this script, and they were looking for tour guides. Universal Studios in 1968 had only started up the Universal City Tours at that time, and they were looking for tour guides, people from different nationalities and that coming in. And he says to me, "You'll get the job." He says, "because I'll recommend you for the job." He says, "You've got to go over and see this guy." His name was Solomon Saperstein. He was at the head of the productions at Universal Studios. And I went away to see this guy in my best bib and tucker. And again, he gave me a script to read, and I read everything as I read. "Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, I'm Scotty McCrystal. I'm your official guide for today, blah, 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 blah." And he says, "When can you start?" And that was it. I was working at Universal Studios the next week. That was way back in the 2nd of May 1968. One of the places that we took on the tour, which they still do to this day, was the stunt arena, where the stuntmen showed them how the fights was done. They've updated it now. It's all different things, you know. They've got the Raiders of the Lost Ark thing and all that, and they've got Jaws and everything. But when I was there, it was cowboys versus cowboys, goodies and baddies. And one of the biggest tourist attractions at that time was the Virginian. There was a television series called The Virginian with an actor called Doug McClure and James Drury. Right? One of the days I was taking the people up, one of the stunt guys got hurt. And everybody was going bananas because they needed somebody for the next show. And I got to know them all. For the 3 months I'd been working there, I got to know all the stunt guys. And the leader of the team was a bloke called Arnie Roberts. And I went over to Arnie and I says, "I'll do Eric's fall." It was a high fall from a saloon roof into a net filled with foam rubber. That's basically what it was. And he says, "Come on, Scotty." And I says, "I'll do it, but I promise you I'll do it." He says, "Right, get up here." So I climbed away up to the top. On these things, it's facades. There's nothing at the back of them. It's only scaffolding. I climbed away up onto the roof, determined. I'm looking down into this thing. It was like looking into a wet sponge, and I was determined I was going to do it. And he says, "Okay, Scotty, I believe you, come down." So away I come down. And what they done was, they moved the stunt arena around that day. The guy who done the fall was taken away. He broke his pelvis, he broke his shoulder. He had a lot of bad injuries. So they were going to need new people. The fella called, I can never remember this guy's name, but it'll come to me, who was doubling for Doug McClure, right? He get moved to doing the high fall, and I get put in. My very first thing in the stunt arena was get hit in the face with a custard pie for Doug McClure. That's exactly what happened. They asked me if I was interested in working in the stunt arena, and I says, you've got to be kidding me. And they says, no, we need somebody. You know, and a lot of the other stunt guys wouldn't come into the stunt arena because it took them away from working in movies and things like that. The stunt arena was a job for either up-and-coming stunt guys or people over the hill. That was basically what it was. But it was a great thing, and we were paid $350 a week. It was brilliant. And I loved every minute of it. But the good thing about it was, I get trained with the best of people. I get trained to ride a horse, pull a horse down, saddle falls, high falls, balcony falls. I get taught how to draw and fire a Colt 45. Right? The next basic thing that happened to me was, I get called into the production manager's office, and he says, "Scotty, how would you like to go to Fort Benning in Georgia?" And I says, "For what?" He says, "They're making a movie called The Green Berets with John Wayne and David Jansen." He says, "We're looking for stunt people." He says, "We need loads of stunt people." He says, "They're willing to let you go for this because you're not really that much involved. They're willing to let you go." I had to sign a contract with Universal Studios, and it says, "Robert Scotty McCrystal, actor stuntman." And it was a 3-year contract with Universal. I was gobsmacked. And then 2 days later, I was standing shaking the hand of John Wayne. You know, a guy from Johnston in Renfrewshire. I'm in Hollywood. Universal. Yeah, you know. Then I went on to work on The Virginian, and then I got another great surprise. It wasn't a surprise. They used to do a thing called the High Chaparral.
Oh, I used to watch that.
Well, I worked on that, and there's a great story involved in that as well. A guy from Glasgow, Ian MacDonald, he worked for the Glasgow Evening Times, right? And his thing was Talk of the Times. It was a piece he did every week, and he'd been sent over to Hollywood as a kind of working vacation, you know, and he was going around all the studios. And we were filming the back lot at Universal, and we were all in a big tent. It was like a big marquee, and I was in full Apache gear. I had the stripes, I had the loincloth, the hair down to here, everything. I hears a voice shouting, "Is there a Scotty McCrystal here?" And I stood up and I says, "Yeah, over here." Now this guy, Ian MacDonald, he looked at me for 2 seconds. He says, "I see an Apache standing in front of me." He says, "But it's a Glasgow accent." You know, and I told him the story and everything. And see, when he got home, he done a piece. And the piece said, he sent it to me, "The only Apache to Palermo, Glasgow." Bob McCrystal, who comes from Johnston, went on and told the story about how I got into the film business and everything. Right? And then 3 years later, I was offered another contract. Made the biggest mistake of my life because I refused it. I wanted to go freelance. And I never worked in America again. I had to come home to Britain to get any work. And that was in 1970, and that was how my film work started here in Britain.
It was a shame.
Yeah.
Excellent. Good stuff.